People say everything was better in the good old days. The music was better. The cricket was better. Life was simpler. But was mobility better? Let's rewind to India in the late 1970s. This was License Raj India. This was Scarcity India, waiting list India. You didn't just walk into a two-wheeler showroom and choose which one you wanted. You had to apply for it, and then you waited, sometimes for years even. Owning a two-wheeler wasn't a lifestyle choice. It meant that your family didn't have to rely on the public bus service anymore. It meant that your children could go to better schools. It meant that you had arrived in life. And the machines that carried this ambition, they weren't motorcycles, they were scooters. If you think of India in 1980, you don't see superbikes. You see a man in a safari suit, a child standing in front, another seated at the back, a tiffin dangling from the hook, and the scooter beneath them, a product of Bajaj Auto.
हमारा बजाज, बुलंद भारत की बुलंद तस्वीर.
The Priya, the Chetak. Named proudly after Maharana Pratap's legendary horse, the Chetak was the beating heart of the middle class in India. 150cc, 2-stroke, 3-speed hand shift, roughly 7 horsepower and 35 to 40 kilometers to the litre. It wasn't desirable, it wasn't exciting, it was dependable. After Bajaj split with Piaggio in 1977, they localized everything. Demand exploded, but because of strict production quotas, sales and supply could not keep up. And that meant that the waiting period for getting one of these scooters sometimes extended to as much as 10 years. In fact, there have been instances where weddings in North India have been postponed just to align with the delivery date of the scooter. In fact, in some cities, the resale value would exceed that of the showroom price. That's not about desirability, that's scarcity economics. In 1982 in India, if you had a government job, if you had a house and you had a Bajaj scooter, you were considered well settled and the ideal bachelor. If you've watched any Bollywood movie of the time, you would have seen a Bajaj Chetak and a man tilting a scooter a good 45 degrees to the right, letting diner juice get to the carburetor before attempting it to kickstart it a good 3 times at least before it would roar to life. All of this after turning the fuel cock on the carb to the right setting. Once you're seated is when the next difference is apparent. The seat is on springs and the handlebar is almost at knee level. The rear brake is under your right foot and not on the handlebar, and that's because that's where the clutch and hand shifter are. Pull the clutch lever in, roll the grip away from you and you're in first. And then as you get into higher gears, your knuckles start pointing towards you, and that's how you rode. The Chetak and the Priyas use a monocoque construction and the engine was mounted on the right side. And that meant that the scooters were inherently unstable and you had to constantly and actively correct that. The government, it didn't want one private player to be responsible for mobility in India. So what it went and did is nationalized Lambretta tooling. What it did is it got all the equipment required, all the dies required, all the heavy tooling required from Lambretta in Italy to Kanpur in India, and went on and set up Scooter India Limited, also known as SIL. The product of all of that labor was this, the Vijai Super. Same 150cc class as the Chetak and the Priya, similar power, but it was a little heavier, it was a little rougher. Now, when India won the Cricket World Cup in 1983, the winning team were all gifted Vijay Supers. This wasn't a random occurrence. It was India's finest, India's pride on 2 wheels. But here's the thing, the public sector, they could produce mobility, but what they couldn't produce was aspiration, and that is a difference that would come to matter. What differentiated it from Hamara Bajaj, and quite significantly so, was that it didn't use a monocoque and had a tubular steel frame where the engine was mounted in the center. That had a marked difference in the way the scooter handled. Especially for me, used to modern scooters, the Vijay didn't need too much mental computation on my part to ride. With all these scooters, you're constantly bobbing up and down because of the springs in the seat. While it was a favorite amongst racing enthusiasts, how they managed to ride and lean these scooters which had tiny 10-inch wheels is beyond me. And then came LML partnering with Piaggio in 1984. Suddenly, out of Kanpur, there was a scooter that wasn't just about supply, it was about the brand. Now the mechanicals were very similar, still 150cc, still two-stroke, but the finish was sharper, the styling was more European. It was targeted at the more style-conscious youth with models like the NV3 and the Alpha. And for the first time in the market, people were not asking about what is available, they were asking, kuch aur mil sakta hai kya? Being that it was half Italian, the attention to detail was much higher on the Vespa than on the Chetak. It had a larger, more distinctive glove compartment and the exposed wheel on the Chetak, and the overall design was more polished and sophisticated. The Vespa was a smidge smoother than the Chetak, but wasn't as hardy, especially in rural conditions. Targeting style-conscious youth with models like the NV3 and the Alpha, the positioning was slightly aspirational and priced at a premium as well. Around 14,000 rupees were what you'd have to spend for a Vespa, whereas the Chetak costed between 10 and 11,000 at the time. With that, choice entered the conversation right after the Vijai Super, and with choice, markets change forever. And then something radical. Along came the Honda Kinetic. 98cc, two-stroke, roughly 7.7 horsepower. That wasn't the revolution. The revolution was this: no clutch, no gears, and electric start. Heck, it also has a properly modern analog instrument cluster for the time that even had a fuel gauge. In India, in 1984, these specs and features were nothing short of mind-blowing. It was targeted heavily towards women riders and the elder demographic. It made mobility easier, it made it accessible, it made it less intimidating and more inclusive. So many stereotypes were broken because so many women riders got into the fold because of the Honda Kinetic. Urban riders embraced it as well. Traffic became so much more manageable because of how light this Kinetic Honda was. Years later, the Honda Activa would go on to become the best-selling scooter in the country. All of that is well and good, but that happened because the seed was planted right here with this Kinetic Honda. Heck, I have so many fond memories with the Kinetic Honda. It was way before my time, but the first scooter, the first two-wheeler I ever rode was the Kinetic Honda, and I had a ball of a time of it. My feet barely touched the ground, but it was still so much fun. And that electric starter, really something else. Riding it is an immediate reminder that majority of the things that we take granted for now in terms of features and tech began with this scooter. Yes, it might feel a little dated, a little crude and not as fast today, but it was a polar opposite back then. By the late 1980s, Bajaj wasn't just defending its dominance, it was also experimenting. Enter the Bajaj Cub. Now this wasn't designed to replace the Chetak, it was a rethink of that entire strategy. With a smaller, lighter 100cc motor and an overall smaller scooter that is competing against 150cc machines, the whole point of this scooter was Bajaj answering a very simple question: does the urban Indian market need all of that bulk? Now to that end, with this scooter they introduced an electric ignition system which was very modern for the time, but it also promised easier starts and smoother running. It delivered close to 40 kilometers to the litre, which was respectable for that era. It was also physically smaller with a more compact stance and smaller diameter wheels. Now, apart from that, Bajaj also had this with a detachable single footrest and an optional wrap-around pillion floorboard. Now, this goes to show that Bajaj at that point of time was experimenting with packaging and with ergonomics. And priced at Rs 9,500, this also sat strategically below the larger Chetak. Scooters were shared. They carried families. Motorcycles? Well, motorcycles carried identity. And in the early 80s, identity was waking up.
ये बुलेट मेरी जान मंजिलों का निशान, ये बुलेट मेरी जान मंजिलों का निशान.
Before youth culture exploded, there was authority, and authority rode a Royal Enfield Bullet 350. Now, the Bullet 350 prides itself with being one of the longest running production motorcycles in the world. And apart from that, you get a 346cc long stroke engine, a proper iron horse. It makes roughly 18 to 19 bhp and it never revved, it thumped. Apart from that, it was mighty heavy, close to 190 kilos. Buying one would require you to shell out around 18,000 rupees. And this was the police officer's bike. This was the army man's bike. This was the landowner's bike. Starting a Bullet 350 required technique. Riding one required you to commit to the right-hand shifting pattern, and braking, that was an act of faith because all you had to rely on were the drum brakes at the front and the rear, which felt wooden at best. But the Bullet 350 was never about speed. It was all about presence, of which it had plenty. Riding a Bullet 350 from this era was an exciting experience. Gears on the right, brake on the left, and a decompression switch that, if you're not used wisely, could lead to some very interesting bruises, if you're lucky, on your shin. This was the first motorcycle in all these years that has made me feel like I was giving my rider's license test. The gear on the right hand had me fumbling like a monkey that's just discovered a banana. I knew what to do with it in theory, but I just couldn't apply it in the practical world. After some time and a lot of apologies to the owner later, I got a hang of riding it, and what a feeling. So robust, so full of soul, and I certainly saw mine when I reached for the brake and nothing happened. But in the 80s, fuel prices started to matter, and that's where the Royal Enfield Bullet 350 started to feel like yesterday's India. Strong, but slow to evolve. Then the shock, the Yamaha RD350. Launched and assembled and branded in India as the Rajdoot 350, this motorcycle featured a parallel twin engine which was available in two output forms. There was the low torque output, which put out around 27 bhp, and the high torque output variant, like the one we have over here, that put out close to 30 bhp of power, and it could do a top speed of around 150 kilometers per hour. And in 1983 in India, that was space age. Although it was detuned from the 39 bhp of the original Japanese motorcycle that was sold abroad, it was still plenty. It was still considered a giant killer at the drag strip, no matter who pulled up. And in the process of getting it to India and making it a little more affordable as well, it also lost the front disc brake, and that gave it a bit of a reputation. But despite all of that, it was still plenty fast, it was still expensive, and it was still thirsty. Now India, it really admired the RD, but it didn't buy it enough for it to become a mainstream success. Hearing stories of its might, and more importantly how expensive it is to buy one today, I approached it with a bit of trepidation, not just in fear of damaging it, but also as to whether or not it will live up to the hype that surrounds it. The very first time I rolled the throttle and got the bike in its power band, it confirmed the hype. It accelerated with such urgency, all while sounding so mesmerizing. Imagine a modern parallel twin at full chat and add the iconic two-stroke sound to it. That's the best way I can describe the sound that the RD350 makes. The brakes again didn't inspire the most confidence, but unlike the Bullet, they at least worked. What little time I spent with it had me absolutely awestruck, and I can only imagine what riding one back in that era must have felt like. Now the RD, it separated riders into two different classes, the ones that chased speed and ones that calculated cost. So clearly the RD350 wasn't a direct fit for the second half, which was the primary buyer in the 1980s. That being said, one thing it certainly was in India, was a legend. And then came balance. Launched to counter the rising threat of the India Suzuki AX100, Yamaha launched the RX100. 98cc, 2-stroke, around 11 horsepower and 100 kilograms. This motorcycle was capable of accelerating from 0 to 60 kilometers per hour in just 7.5 seconds. It offered sharp acceleration and affordable thrills. Backed by TV campaigns with the likes of Sunil Gavaskar, this was street racing culture in India. This was modification culture in India. It democratized performance, it put speed in the hand of the youth, but it was still a 2-stroke, which meant premix oil, a cloud of smoke and rising fuel bills. One kick on a 40-year-old motorcycle. That's reliability many modern bikes don't possess. The RX100 is ridiculously compact, and by that I don't mean small. It is narrow and so easily flickable. You get a sense that if you're strong enough, you don't even need to initiate a wheelie. Just yank on the bar and the front wheel would just come up. The brakes seem like they actually worked on this one, which is a good thing because I was starting to get a little too excited. And then, quietly, without drama, came this. The one motorcycle that would change everything. The Hero Honda CD100.
I'm Bunty. I'm Sunny. I have the most efficient bike.
It was the first lightweight motorcycle to come from the joint venture between Hero and Honda. It featured a 97.2cc single-cylinder 4-stroke engine. It made roughly 7.5 to 8 horsepower and delivered 60 to 70 kilometers to the liter in the real world. It wasn't loud, it wasn't fast, it wasn't romantic. But one thing that it unequivocally was efficient. Its 4-stroke engine paired with a simple, effective but bulletproof 4-speed gearbox meant that there was no premix oil required, no cloud of smoke and longer service intervals. There was also a commercial for this motorcycle that featured Salman Khan, but he wasn't the star of the commercial. The star was the slogan which read, "Fill it, shut it, forget it." A sentiment that echoed the nation's mood, a nation that was trying to make every rupee count. The CD100, it completely took ownership anxiety out of the equation. Before the CD100 came into the scene, people would always ask how fast. After the CD100, they asked how far, a sentiment that still defines the Indian commuter segment today. Look at all these machines here together. Bajaj normalized mobility. With the Vijay, people got the power of choice of not having to choose just one scooter from one manufacturer. The LML Vespa, it furthered the choice that people had. Kinetic introduced convenience. Bullet represented authority. The RD350, that inspired aspiration. The RX100, that democratized thrills. And the CD100 over here, it monetized efficiency. All of these machines over here are more than just products. They're a reflection of a simpler time. In the 1980s, the people of India, they didn't want the loudest, they didn't want the fastest. They prioritized discipline over drama. They wanted the machine that was in line with the economic mood of India at the time. And that was the real revolution.